A good moed. Today's daf is daf Nun Aleph, and the Gemara quotes Abaye, who raises an objection against Rabbah. Rabbah's principle was that kol she'eno bazecher ze'afilu vas achas eno. If you couldn't be mekadesh one sister and then another sister, because that would be an erva of achos ishto, then you cannot be mekadesh both sisters together. Now, what would that mean if you didn't have Rabbah's principle? It would mean that one of the two sisters is mekudeshes. We wouldn't know which one, so it would be a suffix. But Rabbah says, no, we blow it out of the water. It's not valid at all. Neither to this sister nor to that sister. Neither one of them will need a get to permit marriage to another man. And Abai raises a question from Maser. First we'll see Maser Peros, and then we'll see an objection from Maser Behem. And Abai is quoting a Tosefta in the 8th parak of Masechet Dmai. Hamarbe b'Maser. Maser is only chal on 10% of his Peros. He went ahead and he was mafresh 20% of his Peros, a chomesh. And the Tosefta establishes that in that case, Perosov misukanim, umasrosov mikulkolim. What does that mean? It means that the hafrosha is chal, and it's only chal on 10%. We don't know from this 20% that he was mafresh, the 1/5, which is the 10% that's maser, which is not. Now, if he would have been mafresh, maser once, and then maser a second time, bazecher zeh, then the second hafrosha would not be chal. Similar to the case where he was mekadesh a second sister, after he was mekadesh the first sister, the second Kiddushin would not be chal. So it's called eno bazecher zeh. And therefore, vasachas eno, according to Rabbah's principle, the hafrosha should not be chal. Yet the Tosefta paskins that the hafrosha is chal, and therefore the other 80% of his peros are misukanim, meaning they're chulin, they're no longer tevel, you're allowed to eat them. But within the 20% that he was mafresh, there's 10%, which means half of the 20% that is maser, the other half is not maser. Not only that, the other half is tevel. Why? Because it wasn't the nitar al yidei the matir. So now that 20% is me'uravim zebazet. It's got maser in it and has tevel in it. And that's called masrosov mikul kolim, which means that he would not be able to give that 20% that he was mafresh to the Levi, allowing the Levi to eat it, because his tevel within that 20%, within that 50%. The Levi then would have to go ahead and do another hafrosha mimakom acher. So now Abai raises the following objection to Rabbah. According to you, Rabbah, how could it be that perosim misukanim, and we could validate the hafrosha? The hafrosha is eno bazecher zeh. V'amay nema kol she'eno bazecher zeh afilu vasachas eno. Had he been mafresh one maser and then a second maser to equal that 20%, the second hafrosha would not be chal. So therefore, the hafrosha of 20% should not be a valid hafrosha. Malay and Rabbah defends himself against Abaye. Shiny maser to isa lechatzoyer. The Omar tiskadesh palga de chitasa kodsha. Maser is different, because you could be mafresh maser lechatzoyim. For example, let's say he takes 20% of his tvuah, and then he declares that on each chita, each gargir of chita, he wants half of that gargir to be maser. So therefore, there is a way in which he can separate 20% and then set up a valid hafrosha on the 20% by saying that each Chatzi chitusa, which is called palga de chitza in Lashon L'Shas, should be maser. And therefore, when he was mafresh 20%, what we're going to suggest is that his intention was to be mafresh half of each one of the payros, which would calculate totally to 10%. The other chatzi peri would be tevel, and now he has a mixture of maser and tevel on each one of the payros. So the Gemara now raises a second objection to Rabbah. Varei maser behema, the leka lechatzoyim, v'leka b'zecher zeh. In other words, in maser behema, you have to be mafresh an entire animal. You can't be mafresh half of an animal. And now we'll give just a little bit background of the mitzvah of maser behema. The Torah commands us to be mafresh maser annually from bakar and son that were born that year in his flock. And what he does is he puts all his animals into one corral. He makes an opening, a very narrow opening, so that two animals will not be able to exit simultaneously, and he counts them. 1, 2, 3. When he gets to the 10th, he colors the animal with a red marker, a red ink, and that 10th is Maser Behema, which he takes to the Beis HaMikdash as a korban. The status of Maser Behema is equal to that of Kodshim Kalim, which means it's the Basar is Nechal Bailim in Yerushalayim. If the animal turns out to be a Balmum, then you can be poda it. And with that pigeon, after that pigeon, he can eat the animal anywhere, and it's chuli. Now, if he makes a mistake in the minyan, then there's a distinction. If, let's say, he counts the 9th one, and he says this is maser, or he counts the 11th one, and he says this is maser, then as we'll soon see in the Gemara, the Hegdesh and the Kedusha is chal on 9, 11, and of course on 10. However, if he counts, let's say, one of the first 8 animals as 10, that's not chal at all. So there's no possibility of chatzoim, because the Torah says in Vayikra Chav Zayin, "Ha'asiri yeh kodesh l'Hashem," and the Gemara darshins, as Rashi quotes it from Eruvin, "Asiri kulo kodesh l'Shem maser." It's got to be the entire animal, which is number 10, and it's designated as maser. And leka l'chatzoim, so that's called leka l'chatzoim. Now, the Gemara asks the following question: he can't be mafresh 2 behemos from the 10 and say that the maser should be chal on half of each animal. And not only that, he can't be mafresh a 10th animal and be mafresh in his maser, and then be mafresh another animal from the same 10 as maser. And yet, despite this all, Amar Rava, Yatzu Shnayim Basiri, Ukron Asiri, Asiri V'achadasar Muravim Zebazeh. If, when he allows the animal to go through this little opening, and he counts them, 2 animals went out simultaneously. Somehow the portal was too large. And he calls both of them Asiri. So the halacha is that both of these animals have the status of Asiri v'chadasar mu'ravim zebazeh. In other words, we know that one of these 2 animals is maser, not the other one. We don't know which one is maser. So we're going to have to treat both of the animals as maser and the hafrosh is chal. According to Rabbah, how could the hafrosh be chal? It's leka b'zecher zeh. You cannot be mafresh one animal's maser, and then a second animal is maser, and therefore vasachas eno. The Gemara answers, shani maser behem is different. The isei betos. As we indicated before, if he makes a mistake and he counts the 9th as the 10th or the 11th as the 10th, the hafrosh is chal. Disnan, we quote a Mishnah in Masechet Bechoros on Daf Samacham in Beis. In a case where a man makes a mistake in the counting of the animals, V'karol Shi'i Asiri, he counts the 9th one as if it was the 10th, and he declares it's Kodesh. Lasiri Shi, he made a mistake in the 10th, he called the 9th. Ulachadasar Asiri, or he counted the 11th as the 10th. Shloshton Mekudashim. All three will be Kodesh. Why? Because Kedushas Maser is chal on the Asiri, even though he called it the Chi. And Kedushas Maser is chal on what he called the Asiri, even though it was the 9th or the 11th. Therefore, the Gemara says that in this case, that there will be a chalos maser even when it was the 11th that went out and he called it the 10th, or the 9th and he called it the 10th. We do not apply the principle of kol she'enu b'zecher zeh afilu v'sachas eno. But in the case of Kiddushin, there's no such thing as Kiddushay toes, and therefore if they both can't be chal on two sisters, but zecher zeh, they can't be chal b'vasachas. And I think that the underlying, logic of the Gemara, for 1 second, is the following: that when he was mafresh two animals that came out simultaneously, and he called them both maser, we can consider that one of them would have been betos, because in effect he's making a mistake by counting two animals as maser. But it doesn't matter. Why? Because let's consider that one of those two animals would be the 9th, and he mistakenly called the 10th, or one would be 11th, and he mistakenly called the 10th. The maser would be chal. So in that sense, within the hafrasha of two animals, it's efshar b'zecher zeh, meaning that any one of those two animals potentially could have been chal through a hafrasha, even though it's the 9th and the 11th. Gemara raises the following kasha on Rabbah from Chalos Toda. A little bit of background about Chalos Toda. A person brings a carbon Toda for one of 4 categories of salvation, and he's got to bring together with, as an accompaniment to the carbon, 40 chalos. They have to be shlemos and not prusos. 10 will be chometz, 30 will be matzah, and the matzah, 30 matzos divide up into 3 categories. There's what's called chalos rikikin. There's called chalos, there's rikikin, and there's rechuva. Now, altogether, if you count the 3 categories of matzah with the category of chametz, we have 4 sections, each of which is made up of 10 chalos. And he gives 10 to the Kohen. I should say he should give 1/10 to the Kohen from each of the 4 minim. So all told, he gives 4 chalos out of the 40 to the Kohen. Now, when the animal, which is the carbon toda, is shechted, that shchitas hazevach is makadesh the 40 rekikin. and they have the same status as the Toda. No, I'm sorry. The Toda could be eaten for Laila Achas Ushnei. Right. They could be eaten for a Yom and a Laila. Now, if he was mafresh the maser to the Kohen from the 40 chalos, bitos, then there's no kiddush. Because any hegdesh is not chal bitos. Again, we're not getting into machlokas beisil beit Shammai here. So, frek the Gemara, hare toda the lesser bitos. If, let's say, he meant to be mafresh from one min, and instead he was mafresh from a second min, it's not kedosha. The lesser nami b'zecher zeh. So your answer that you gave to maser behema, namely it's isa b'tos, does not apply here to carbon toda with regard to the chalos. And not only that, you can't be mafresh another 4 chalos after you were mafresh already 4 chalos. Nevertheless, we have a machlokas chachamim between Chizkiah the Rebbe and Rabbi Yochanan the Talmud regarding Toda shenishchata al shmonim chalas. He brought into the Azorah, together with his carbon Toda, 80 chalas. And he was makadesh through the shchita of the Toda, 80 chalas. Chizkiah Amar Kodshei le'arboim mitoch shmonim. It's a valid afrosha. And 40 out of the 80 will be chal. But we have a mixture now, in which case we don't know which other 40 that are going to be chal. The classic case of toes is when he was mafresh chalos levanos, but he had intention of being mafresh choros. Now, in this case of Chizkiah, yesh lechol es kol shmonim achalos b'kedusha b'meshach yom v'layla. We're going to consider as if all 80 are chalos toda l'chumra, even though only 40 out of the 80 are chalos, and therefore he would have to eat them b'kedusha for 1 day and 1 night. However, Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Lo kodshi le arba mitoch shmonim. The kiddush is not chal at all, because he was mafresh more than the shear. It would seem, therefore, says the Gemara, that Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing about kol she'edu b'zecher zafil v'sachasenu. Chizkiah never accepted that klal, and therefore, even though a person cannot be makdish 80 chalos, bazu achar zu, meaning 40 and then 40, nevertheless, if he's mafresh with one afrasha, 80 chalos, the afrasha will be chal vis-a-vis 40 out of the 80. And Rabbi Yochanan, on the other hand, accepted the klal of Rabbah, and therefore, since he cannot be mafresh 40 and then another 40, he can't be mafresh 80. But it comes out that the Rebbe, meaning Chizkiah, is against Rabbah. And the Gemara answers, La Vitmar Allah, don't we have an answer of Zera that the machlokas is to be interpreted in a different light? Hakol modim, kol hechniyom kodshi le'arbaim mitoch shmonim, kodshi lo yikdish. Everybody agrees, even according to Chizkiah, if he was mafresh 80 chalos, and if he had 80 chalos in front of him, and he was mafresh 40 out of the 80, and we don't know which of the 40 he was mafresh, then the hafresh of the kedusha is chal on 40 out of the 80. Everybody agrees to that, and you have a tarovas of 40 out of 80. On the other extreme, if he says lo yiklishu arboim elim kein kodshi shmonim, he makes a condition that I don't want 40 out of the 80 to be kodesh. I want to feed all my friends, and therefore I want 80 lo kodsh. And that means that everybody, including Chizkiah, accepted the principle of Rabbah that you cannot be magdish 40 out of 80. Lo nechliku el bistam. The machlokus between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan is a case of stam. In other words, he was mafresh 80 chalas. And we don't know exactly what his intention was. Mar Sav, according to Chizkiah, this person did not intend to be mafresh all 80 chalas as a korban toda, but rather lachrayas kavacham. He only had in mind that 40 out of the 80 should be kedoshos, but in event that any of those 40 chalas get lost, or let's say all of the 40 chalas get lost, he's got a built-in replacement with the other 40. And therefore, according to Chizkiah, the Kiddushin is chal on 40 of the first 40 chalas, because he only had an intention to be mafresh 40 chalas. Marsav, but Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And he says, "Lekarbon gadol kamacham," and he actually, we take him literally. And when he was makdish 80 chalas, it means that he wanted all 80 chalas to be kadoshos. And therefore, since he cannot be mafresh but zecher 40 and then another 40, the Kiddushin is not chal at all. Now, Rava, back on Daf Nunom and Beis, explained the Mishnah based on the principle of Rabbah. So if a man is Makadesh two achios ka'achas, the Mishnah says that the Kiddushin is not chal, and Rava interprets it based on the principle of Rabbah kol she'enu b'zecher zeh afil b'sachasenu. Frektig more typically the Kiddushin she'enu misurim l'biyaninu. Rava has accepted a principle that if you have Makadesh and Isha, and that Kiddushin could not allow bia, then the Kiddushin is not chal at all. And in this case, we don't know which of the two sisters is Mikudeshes, so that each sister might be Achos Ishto, and therefore he's not allowed to have bia with either of them. So why did Rava feel compelled to introduce Rabbah's principle Kol She'eno in order to justify the psak of our Mishnah that the Kiddushin is not chal on either one of the two? And the Gemara answers that L'dvarav de Rami bar Chama Kamar, that Enochinami Rava would have given a simple explanation for our Mishnah. It's Kiddushin she'ena misurim l'bia, and therefore it's not chal. However, Rava had heard from Rami bar Chama that he rejected the principle, as we'll soon see, Abaye also rejected the principle of Kiddushin she'ena misurim l'bia, and therefore Rami bar Chama wanted to derive from the posuk Vishalach Osolo Sikach Litzor that if these two achios became tsaros, zu lezu, the Kiddushin is not chal. And therefore, Rava assumed that according to Rabbi Bar Chama, since he needed this pasuk, and Rava said that I object to the interpretation of Rami Bar Chama of this pasuk, but it's possible that Rami Bar Chama would derive from that pasuk a principle of Kol She'enu B'Zecher Zeh Afil V'Sachasenu, which is Rabba's principle. And since he cannot be Makadesh both sisters one after the other, he cannot be Makadesh them both at the same time. So basically, it was Rami Bar Chama who derived from the pasuk in Vayikra Yuches that Kol She'eno B'Zecher Zeh Afil V'Sachasenu. And therefore, in order to explain our Mishnah of Shtei Achios in a way that would reflect the sheet of Rami Bar Chama, Rava introduced Rabba's principle Kol She'eno B'Zecher Zeh. Rava himself would say that's Kiddushin she'ena misurim l'bia. He doesn't need to activate and apply the principle of Rabbah. Itmar, Kiddushin she'ena misurim l'bia, a man is Makadish one of two sisters, or a mother and a daughter, and he doesn't explicate which of the two should be Kiddushin, he can't be married to either one of them. And that's going to be Rava's Shita, but Abai Omar Havi Kiddushin. Abai is going to say, we don't know which of the two is married to him, which of the two is a chalos, valid a chalos Kiddushin. And therefore he's going to have to divorce both of them with a get. Rav Amar Lo Havi Kiddushin. Rava says that the Kiddushin is not chal because an Omar Rava Barahina Asperli, a Tana, Namora by the name of Barahina, he explained to me the source for this halach of Kiddushin Sheina Mesur L'Bia Elavi Kiddushin, deriving it from a pasuk, Ki Yikach Ish Isha Uba'ala, and the words Ki Yikach mean Kiddushay Kesef, Uba'ala means that she's Re'uya L'Bia. And when is Ki Yikach Chal? When is it valid Kiddushin? If it's Kiddushin HaMesurim Le'Uba'ala. But if it's Kiddushin Sheina Mesurim L'Bia Lo Havi Kiddushin. And at this point, the Gemara is going to quote our Mishnah and raise an objection to Rava from the Reish of the Mishnah. Abai, in the dissenting view, is going to use the Reish of the Mishnah as a proof to his Shita, that Kiddushin Sheina Mesurim L'Bia Havi Kiddushin, but eventually we're going to quote the Seif of our Mishnah, and that's going to prove Rava's Shita is going to be a kasha on Abai. None. We learned in our Mishnah, Makadish Isha Bito, Isha Vachosa Ka'achas Einon Mikudoshos. So if he was Makadish them both simultaneously, then the Kiddushin is not Chal. So the Gemara is now Medayik from the Lashon HaMishnah. He wanted to be Makadish both of them Kachas, and therefore it's not Chal. Implying that if he would have said Achas mi Isha Ubita, or Achas mi Isha Vachosa, I want to marry one of them, just he doesn't specify which one, then Mikudeshes. Why? Because he's only interested in Mikadish one of them. In fact, the Gemara of Amai. But according to Rava, who holds that, forget about Rava's principle of Eino B'Zecher Zeh, we have a principle of Kiddushin She'eino Mesurim L'Bia. And that's exactly what you have now, because he doesn't know which of the ones of these two were Mekudoshos, and therefore each one is going to be a suffix. Maybe she is either the bas, or the aim, or the achos of his wife. So why is it that if he specifies that he wants to marry one of the two, the Kiddusha Bichal on one of the two, we don't know which one, and the implication of the Mishnah is that both of them would be asuros, both would need a get, and the Kiddusha would be chal on one of them. Why? It's Kiddushin Sheina Mesurim L'Bia, Tiyufta de Rava, Amalcha Rava, Hula Taimech. And if you want to defend my dissenting Bar Plukta, namely Abaye, who holds the Kiddushin She'ena Mesurim L'Bia, have a Kiddushin, and therefore the diuk of the Reisha supports Abaye, I will ask you from the Sefer of the Mishnah. Ultamechem Sefer. You're asking a kasha on me and raising an objection from the Reisha. Well, why don't you raise an objection to Abaye from the Sefer? What does it say in the Sefer? Maise b'chamesh noshim u'bahen shtei achios v'liket echad kilkola shel te'enim v'shelahem hoisa v'shel shvius hoisa. As we discussed this all yesterday when we learned the Mishnah, v'omar, and he says, Harei kulchem mekudoshos li b'kalkola zu. I want to be Makadish all 5 women, including 2 sisters, with this kalkola. V'omru chachamim ein ha'achios mekudoshos. the two sisters are not married. Why not? It would seem, if we're medayik from the Lashon HaMishnah, that the achios are not mekudashos, hanachrios mekudashos. The other three nachrios who are not related, they would be mekudashos. So Rava says the following: Hechidam, if he wants all five to be married, and there's only a validity with regard to 3 out of the 5, then that's a case of kni at v'chamorhu. V'at v'chamor lo kana. If a person gives a matana and he says, I want you together with the chamor to be kona this matana, meaning that the chamor will be kona half of the matana and you'll be kona the other half, the din is that since the chamor can't be kona, therefore even the person, the human being, is not zocha in his half, because the nosein had kavana that it would be all or nothing. That half would go to the person, the other half to the chamor. And if it can't go that way, then it's not chal at all. And here too, we should apply the same principle of at v'chamor. He was only intending to be mekadesh all 5 women, that's called kulchem. And he doesn't want the Kiddushin to be chal in 3 out of the 5. It's an all or nothing proposition. And since the Kiddushin can't be chal on all of them, because 2 of them are sisters, therefore the Kiddushin can't be chal on the other 3 as well. And therefore we're going to have to reinterpret the Mishnah.